Thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate your attendance. We're really excited today to have this forum featuring the candidates of the 2nd Congressional District in Iowa. So we appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon. And many thanks to the library here in Coralville for hosting this event. I am Leah Donald. I am here representing the Johnson County Task Force on Aging. And I have here with me Cindy Conger from the League of Women Voters. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little comment about the League.
I will. I'm Cindy Conger, the co-president of the current League of Board of League of Johnson County League. President. Oh, never mind. I'll bet you already know that the League of Women Voters is very interested in having people actively engage and participate in government at every level. I'm happy to see this is a full room. I think this room shows great promise for participation in the future. I think otherwise, I will simply say that we're delighted to co-sponsor this wonderful task force aging planned event. And I hope you all enjoy it. And I want you to be thinking about the questions you're going to be writing down on those white cards and giving to Paula Vaughn. So thank you very much for coming. We're delighted to be here.
Thank you, Cindy. And as Cindy mentioned, if you didn't already get one of those white cards, we would love your questions. And I'd like to be clear, we would prefer questions, no comments. If you haven't received one and you would like a comment card or a question card, please raise your hand and we'll make sure to get one of those to you. And then we'll collect them for the candidates. I'm very, very pleased to introduce our panel of journalists today who have agreed to moderate this forum. We have Nick Weig from KGAN, James Lynch from the Gazette, and Kathy Obradovich from the Des Moines Register. So thank you all for coming and making this event as well attended as it has been. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. But before I do that, a couple of quick comments. We will allow 1 minute from each of the candidates to answer the questions. We'll be starting with questions from the moderator, and then moving to questions from you, and then back to the moderators. And then the candidates will be able to give a 90-minute closing statement.
90 minutes?
Second.
90 minutes.
All right, that's great.
I mean, block your...
Bring the popcorn.
This is, yeah.
I didn't even do 90 minutes when I taught college.
This is an opportunity for them to really stretch themselves. No, thank you for catching my misspoken. 90 seconds. And thank you so much to the candidates for making it out today. And please, I know we're all enthusiastic people here supporting our government, and we do ask that you hold your applause to the end in the sake of time. So thank you to the candidates, and I'll turn it over to our panel.
Okay. Well, I think we were going to give the candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves. Just take very brief, 30 seconds max, and just introduce yourself, starting with Congressman Loebsack, please.
Yeah, Dave Loebsack from Iowa City here. I am the incumbent. I'm in my 6th term, hoping to get another one. My wife Terry is over there, front row and on the right side. We've been married for quite a long time, actually, since 1995, and over half of our marriage, I like to say, I've been in this job. She's been right there by my side. We've got 4 kids between us, and I'm just happy to be here today, and I want to thank both the sponsoring organizations. I want to put in a particular plug for Bob Welch, because he starts twisting our arm on this in about January of like the off year, so thanks, Bob, appreciate it.
Thank you. Dr. Peters.
So I'm Christopher Peters. I've been married actually a bit longer than you now, by 1994, so 24 years. My wife Julie is right there. We have 3 sons, and as of a little over a month ago, 1 grandson. Don't applaud till the end, just a reminder. But we're pretty excited about that. Been a physician here in the Iowa City area for the past 14 years. This is my 2nd bid to unseat Congressman Loebsack, and I think we will be successful this time.
And Mr. Strauss, thank you.
My name is Mark Strauss. I'm 60 years old. I moved to Iowa back in 1989. I spent the last 42 years in the lighting industry. In the last 13 years, owned Strauss Architectural Systems in Bettendorf, Iowa. I sold that company January 1st and have taken over as a national sales manager for the LED-based emergency lighting system that I invented in 2005 and taken that national. But I've just been tired of what's going on in Washington. That's why I decided to throw my hat in the ring. I'm tired of complaining and ready to start doing.
Okay, and thanks for holding your applause. We do have a bunch of questions from the audience already about healthcare, so let's start off with that. And let's start with Mr. Strauss and then keep going around. Give us your main plan for reforming healthcare. And secondly, if you have any ideas for something that could be accomplished with split control of Congress, I'd like to hear those ideas as well.
Okay, well, first of all, when it comes to health care, back in 2008, President Obama came out with the Affordable Care Act that didn't end up very affordable. Back then, my insurance was $133 a month with a $2,500 deductible. In February of this year, when they got rid of the mandate, I canceled my insurance, at which time it was $433 a month or $413 a month with a $7,500 deductible. You can't bring in the healthcare industry, basically healthcare professionals, big pharma, as well as big insurance, tell them we're going to give you 30 million more customers and don't worry about what you charge them because the taxpayer is going to pick up the dime, and then we're going to throw an individual mandate on top of that. My goodness, anytime the government mandates anything, the price goes through the roof.
Thank you. And Congressman Loebsack.
Oh, okay. Thanks for the question. I did support the Affordable Care Act, and I still do. I think it's gone some distance in bringing in, as Mark said, millions more Americans into the health insurance market and giving them the peace of mind that they do have health insurance, especially if they were to have some kind of a problem that if they couldn't pay for it, they might go bankrupt, and that really is what happened quite often before the Affordable Care Act was put into place. We've seen also the fact that if you have a pre-existing condition, you can't be denied health care and you can't be charged exorbitant rates. We're seeing the Trump administration now and the majority party in Congress attacking the Affordable Care Act some 60 or so times over the past several years. I think there are improvements to be made, but I think we have to keep the Affordable Care Act and build upon it, and that's something I'm going to continue to do, provided I get reelected this time around, and I appreciate the opportunity to say those words about the Affordable Care Act. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dr. Peters.
So this has been my industry for nearly 30 years since becoming a physician, and I've seen it on all sides as both a provider as well as an occasional patient or father of one. Healthcare costs are the problem. Congress focuses way too much on coverage, extending coverage through plans like the Affordable Care Act, but costs are what are spiraling out of control. And unless we do something about costs, we're not going to do coverage issues are going to continue to be a problem. Healthcare premiums are rising in Iowa for employer-sponsored care 7 to 10% every year, far outpacing wage growth. The Affordable Care Act was not the cause of all the problems we have in healthcare. That goes back about 30-some years, but it certainly did not do what the name intended it to do, which is to make healthcare more affordable. The one thing I'm certain of is that healthcare will come up again in Congress, probably this next year. I want another physician at that table, as opposed to a college professor, one who's used to advocating for patients to get better healthcare.
I don't know what our rule is on responses, but I think if somebody's mentioned by name or maybe by title,
fair enough.
we could give them a few seconds to respond. So, Congressman Lopez.
Well, no, I won't respond to that particular comment, but I will say that, as I said, the Affordable Care Act clearly can be better. It can be made better. I think, for example, that we ought to give states more ability to work their own plans. Not as far as what we've seen here in Iowa, because the plans that are going to be offered by the Farm Bureau are going to be the kinds of plans that are going to basically cause folks with pre-existing conditions to be priced out of the health insurance market, and that's not acceptable. That's something you asked about split control. I think it's important that we have a check on the administration and what they've been trying to do to undermine the Affordable Care Act, and I'm going to intend to continue to do that.
And to be fair, so Dr. Peters, about the question about split control, what do you think could be accomplished, for example, if the House flips to Democratic control or the Senate, and we, of course, continue to have a Republican president?
So I think there are a lot of really common sense things that can be done in healthcare, and I've talked about these a lot. I can't really fit them into a 1-minute response, but the beauty of some of the things I'm talking about is they can be done piecemeal. So you can advocate for a higher deductible insurance plans be more widely available and get that through. You can advocate for having more people have access to health savings accounts. You can advocate for having the government help subsidize lower income people so that they can get insurance or get their health savings account properly funded. There's a lot of things we can do on those edges. None of this touches pharmaceuticals, which I hope will come back later because that's at least a 2-minute answer.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Strauss, a brief response from you.
Well, and like what was brought up earlier is addressing the actual cost of healthcare. My company, Strauss Architectural Systems, I personally have sold $700 a foot decorative handrail into hospitals, $20,000 water walls. Who puts a water wall in a hospital? That's just a place to breed germs, and it doesn't cure anybody. $15,000 decorative wall sconces. We got to stop having hotels for people to go to and start having hospitals. When I was a kid, you went to a place that had hard tile floors that could be bleached and sterilized. The same thing with the walls. Now you got carpets and wallpaper. We got to have good common sense things going on to bring down the cost of healthcare.
Changing gears here. In recent years, regardless of which party has been in control of Congress, we've seen majorities disagree on everything from overhauling health care to taxes. Divisions within the parties have prevented action on some issues like Medicare and immigration. Continuing resolutions rather than annual budgets seem to be the norm, and the legislative process seems paralyzed. So what are Americans supposed to do if they can't rely on Congress to address the big issues facing the nation? And we begin with
Mr. Strauss.
Mr. Strauss.
Okay, so basically, well, the gridlock in Washington and in the House and the Senate, regardless of it flips, the whole reason, one of the reasons I'm running is because can you imagine a Congress and a Senate with no clear majority that has a party boss telling people to vote their party lines? Anytime you see people voting party lines, they're not voting their conscience and they're not voting the conscience of the constituents. If I go to Congress, I can assure you, nobody's going to tell me how to vote. I'll never vote for a bill that I haven't completely read, and if it's not good for America, I'm not going to be going at it. But if you could imagine a Congress and a Senate with multiple parties to where multiple parties had to come together and do what's right for America, not what their party boss tells them to do. So like I said, if I go to Washington, believe me, things are going to be different, at least where they go with me. And of course, my perfect situation would be 217, and me. Then I'd run for Speaker, and I'd change the rules in the House.
Dr. Peters.
So this is going to be an area I'm sure that Dave and I will agree. One of the primary problems in Congress has been the fact, especially in the House, that they've not been failing what's called normal order in the House for decades. And this is not a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. It's a both-party problem. It's been 21 years since Congress passed a budget on time through normal order. During that time, the national debt has grown from $5 trillion to over $21 trillion. I think there's a direct correlation there between taking care of the budget or looking at the budget and actually going way over budget. So restoring normal order in the House is critical, and that's regardless of whether it's a Republican House or a Democratic House. Paul Ryan promised that last time. I was hoping he would deliver. He failed to do that. But again, this has been party after party. So one of my first votes in Congress will be to elect a new Speaker of the House and all the leadership. I look forward to picking someone who is going to restore normal order to the House.
Congressman.
You had a lot there, James. We could spend a lot of time on that question because they had a lot of different parts. I'll just talk about a little bit about my own role in this. When it comes to gridlock, I pride myself on working with the other side of the aisle on any number of issues. I think out of 435 members of the House, I think I'm the 11th highest when it comes to the percentage of bills that are offered by the other party that I actually put my name on. I think it's somewhere around 46% of the bills that I put my name on are originated by a Republican. I wish all those bills would come to the floor of the House. I'd have a better score in terms of how I vote, in terms of the parties, that sort of thing. But I'm not in charge of that. Paul Ryan puts those bills on the floor. But this is something that I've worked on, whether it's rural broadband, whether it's veterans, whether it's education, any number of issues. I have a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle. When we left, one friend of mine from Ohio and I, we've worked on a precision agriculture bill. When we left, literally the day we left after the vote, we put our arms around each other and we said, no matter how this majority goes on November 6th, let's keep working together on this bill. It's that important.
Thank you.
We now have a trade war going on. We do have a deal now with Canada and Mexico, but the big problem here in Iowa seems to be China. What actions can lawmakers take to diffuse or resolve this situation to not only protect Iowa growers, but producers and consumers? Dr. Peters, we'll start with you.
So this has been an area where I have openly disagreed with President Trump with the tariff policy. I think tariffs are a very blunt instrument to use in trade negotiations. I think China is a bad actor in trade in a lot of ways. It just wouldn't have been the thing I would have looked at, a tool I would have chosen to use. I think we need to negotiate better trade deals, but it shouldn't be at the expense on the back of Iowa farmers, and that is what we're seeing. So what can the legislature do going forward? You know, I think talking to the president, trying to expedite getting these things resolved is one important thing. I suspect I will have a working relationship with the president if elected. Then there's been talk about whether Congress needs to claw back some of that trade authority at the executive branch, regardless of who's in the White House. And I think that's something they should certainly consider doing as well. And advocating for better trade deals, advocating for better, fairer things from China, for your trade from China is important.
Congressman?
Yeah, actually, what's happened with China is one of the reasons why I voted against trade promotion authority being granted to this president or any president for that matter on these critical issues. I don't want to turn over my power to the president. I don't care if it's Barack Obama negotiating TPP or President Bush fighting with China on the trade wars. I think Congress has a very important role to play in all of this, and we need to exercise that role. We need to have allies in this. Unfortunately, this administration has picked fights with all of our allies, so it's kind of hard to deal with China when we're picking fights with the European Union or when we're dealing with NATO on a security basis and picking fights with the same folks. This has been devastating for our farmers. I talk to farmers all the time. I get out and I go to their farms, I go to meetings, and this has been a real problem for us. And we've seen the price of corn drop dramatically. They're not getting anywhere near $4 a bushel, which is what it takes just to break even when it comes to the cost of production. But I think we've got to get our allies behind us. And I work with the Republican members. I'm the only Democrat in the delegation in Iowa. And I work with them all the time on these issues on a bipartisan basis. And we've been really working together quite well on it, too, quite honestly.
And Mr. Strauss?
If you go to my website, straussforhouse.com, I have a video that I made on trade. I do not split with the president when it comes to utilizing tariffs as a negotiating point. I'm going to tell you something. We have created a monster with China. As a matter of fact, when you look at Asia in general, South Korea, Japan, China, Indonesia, all these countries are doing very well, and they did it on our backs. We grew those economies, and now it's time for us to take advantage of them. And if that means we need to get tough with them on trade and have some and start putting in a plan on tariffs, but I don't want to pick it with this product and that product and that product. Please go to my website. There's about a 3.5-minute video that details my plan on trade. And it does get tough with these countries, but believe me, we can even this thing out. If we can get everybody really doing free trade, guess what? America will go back to being the strongest manufacturing power in the world, and we need to in this future coming up with AI and robotics. Believe me, there's not going to be all these manufacturing jobs in the near future. A decade from now, things are going to be very different.
Thank you very much.
All right. Let's turn to immigration and question first to Congressman Loebsack. How can you get past the political polarization on immigration to accomplish what most people by polls think needs to be done, securing the border, dealing with the 10 to 12 million undocumented people in this country and addressing the country's need for immigrant labor?
Right. I think it's a great question. First of all, politicians need to quit demagoguing this issue. I think that would be very, very helpful. Beyond that, we had in 2013 a comprehensive immigration reform bill that passed the U.S. Senate, and in a bipartisan way. And it came over to the House, and it wasn't allowed to vote on the floor. And then when Speaker Ryan took over for Speaker Boehner, he didn't allow that bill to come to the floor either. I think it's apparent to everybody that we've got to have comprehensive immigration reform. There are some things we should do piecemeal. There's no question about that. And for example, if we could deal with the DACA kids or if we could get a DREAM Act, I think that would be wonderful. And I think we could actually get bipartisan support for that, even in the U.S. House. I think we could pass both of those measures. But the problem is that right now, that's not the case. We have the parties fighting one another. Obviously, the leaderships in particular doing this. There are a lot of good folks with goodwill, I think, in the U.S. House and in the U.S. Senate. And it is a question of, I think, just putting down our political armor, kind of what Dr. Peters said, and working together on the issues.
And same question to Dr. Peters, with the sort of caveat of how do you get past the sort of construct in Congress right now of one party saying you have to secure the border first before you do anything else, and the other party saying no, you have to do it all at the same time?
Well, and I'll bounce this back to Dave's court in just a second, but I believe there were two bills on immigration this past session that one was a more moderate proposal, and you voted against both. So I would love your explanation about maybe why you did that. But I think this is part of a bigger problem. A lot of these issues, not just immigration, but become heavily politicized, and we need to kind of start breaking them down and finding solutions. And that requires doing a whole lot of things, not just in Congress, but what we do here on the ground as voters is being informed, understanding the issues, giving feedback to our legislators. We get the politics we deserve, quite frankly, and right now from the halls of Congress to school halls and social media, it's a pretty divided nation. I think we need to really work collectively to come together to solve these issues. So I'd love Dave's response regarding his votes.
You can respond if you like, Congressman.
If he wants to.
If I like.
If you'd like to.
Right. There was another
You don't have
option.
to.
Yeah, it's a little technical, but there was another option. That was the so-called Queen of the Hill option. And we almost had enough votes. We almost had 218 signatures on what's called a discharge petition, but a couple of Republicans decided they weren't going to do it at the very end. We could have put 4 bills on the floor of the House, had a vote on every one of those bills, and if any one or more passed, then the one with the most votes would have been put into law. It ended up being a party line vote. It ended up being the Republican Party itself saying, no, we're not going to do it that way. That would have been the best way to do it as far as I'm concerned. In fact, one of the bills that didn't succeed didn't even get much more than 125 votes, I don't think. So unfortunately, it was done in a very partisan way, not in a bipartisan way, which is what a lot of Republicans and Democrats wanted to do, but we were not allowed to have that vote on the floor. If those 4 bills had been on the floor, I'm convinced we would have gotten one that we could have agreed upon.
And Mr. Strauss, mostly a question to you also about how to get past the party polarization to get done what people want done on immigration.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, this is not that difficult an issue. We got a few million kids that have never known any country but here. They go to school with your kids. They should be made U.S. citizens. It's no fault of their own. Furthermore, we've got millions of other undocumented people that have been living here for decades. And if they've been living here felony-free and been good, productive citizens here in America, you know what, let's give them a green card, give them a path to citizenship, but let's get them out of the shadows. But at the same time, we need to get rid of the bad eggs, and we need to secure the border. It can be done all at once. The two parties just use this as a hot button issue they have for the last 20 years, and they're going to continue to. It's not that tough. Again, 217, and me, I'll bring it to the floor. I'll make it happen.
Mr. Strauss, we come right back to you, talking about the economy. The nation has enjoyed long, sustained job growth and low unemployment. We've seen modest or slight increases in wages and household incomes. But the two big concerns right now seem to be the lack of workers and the lack of wage growth. What can Congress do, and what should Congress do to stimulate the workforce, whether it's immigration or job training, and promote wage growth including raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah, I kind of hate to see setting the new low standard of what you can pay somebody. I'd rather see rules in our economy. Our economy is not a monopoly game. In monopoly, one person wins and everybody else loses. We need to find a way to get equality, some sort of pay equality, and if that means on maybe publicly traded companies having maximum to average ratios. Currently, the average CEO in America of a publicly traded company makes over 350 times more than the average worker. That's insanity. We need to find a way to put rules in the economy to help everybody. And that doesn't mean the minute you set another low pay, another minimum wage, guess what? Other prices come up and you're right back where you started. So we've got some real issues to face here. Besides, again, AI and robotics, this is no joke. What's coming is going to take jobs faster than anybody can imagine. So don't worry about the fact that we got a few extra workers now, because that's going to change. And we need to make sure America's strong as the rest of the world goes through this at the same time and maintain the workers that we have. But honestly, those days of send us your poor and huddled masses are gone, because in the upcoming decades, we're not going to have jobs for people. And we're not going to see the things we do now because of technology.
Dr. Peters, more rules on wages solve the
Right.
problem?
So wage growth is interesting. We are seeing some evidence that it is increasing, but it also, in addition to that, if you add in all what people get as far as compensation from companies, specifically healthcare, with those costs rising, if you factor in what they're getting in form of healthcare benefits through their employers, actually wages are not nearly as stagnant as they look. Unemployment is one of my favorite metrics to look at the health of the economy, and one of the most compelling came out last year is that of all the people who were unemployed and found work, 70% weren't even looking for a job. They had dropped out of the labor force. That is how strong our labor, our need for labor is right now. So the biggest thing I would like to address that with, and I'm not as skeptical as Mr. Strauss is regarding AI and robotics, is expanding our pool of legal immigration, people that come here with high skills and people that come here with low skills. That is what makes America. That's what has made America. We will need that going forward as well.
Congressman?
Yeah, first on the minimum wage. If the market actually worked as we would like it to work, we wouldn't have a need for a minimum wage, but it doesn't, and that's why we have minimum wage. And I do believe we ought to increase it. We can argue about how much, but there are folks who are surviving, not just teenagers, but there are a lot of folks out there, who have families who are trying to survive on a minimum wage, and they might very well have to have more than one job just to do that. Workforce training is a huge issue, obviously. I hear that from employers all the time here in Iowa with the low unemployment rate, and they need workers. But a lot of those workers aren't qualified. So I actually have a bill at the federal level that kind of mirrors the 240E program here at the state level that would essentially help community colleges interface more with employers, especially when it comes to creating new jobs, not just filling positions that exist now. But workforce development is absolutely critical. I have my own saying. I like community colleges so much. I think they're the principal intersection between education and workforce development. I want to do all I can for those community colleges and what they do.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I wanted to touch on a key environmental issue here. Dr. Peters, EPA has slashed regulations at a rapid pace since President Trump took office nearly 2 years ago. How far is too far when balancing productivity of the American economy with the conservation of our natural resources?
Well, I think there is a point where it becomes too far. How do we define that? That is really difficult. That is more of a societal where we got to decide, we got to make that decision and communicate that to our elected representatives. I think this is a pendulum that swings back and forth every time the administration changes, right? I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I remember when Earth Day started. I remember Time magazine cover stories about polluted waters and polluted air. I think nobody wants to go back that. It's a conservative principle that you want to preserve or conserve your environment for future generations. But every human activity is going to have an environmental impact. Just the fact that we're here, even if we had none of the conveniences we take for granted every day. And so finding that balance is not something that's an ever-going process that's going to continue for as long as humans are on this planet. I think what we have seen, the rollback we have seen for the most part has been good. I think there was The Obama administration pushed that pendulum too far. It's swinging back to a more neutral position, in my opinion.
Congressman, President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. What meaningful legislation can Congress advance and still earn the support of Republicans and the White House?
Well, we've already advanced some legislation. We, for example, extended the production tax credit a couple of years back for wind power, also the investment tax credit for solar power. Those are great provide great opportunities to make sure that we're producing good, clean energy here in the state of Iowa. Many of you know that nearly 40% of our electricity is now generated by wind power. I don't always enjoy going down Interstate 80 to Newton, which I do on a pretty regular basis, but I do enjoy now seeing those wind towers that are going up in Poweshiek County. That's the Poweshiek project that Alliant is doing, and they couldn't have done that had it not been for the extension of the production tax credit, which I worked really hard for when we got that extended, and also the investment tax credit for solar. We got farmers who are putting solar panels on top of their hog confinements, for God's sakes, because they got a bottom line that they have to worry about, and they're taking advantage of that, and the companion state tax credit as well.
Mr. Strauss, I'm going to kind of turn towards one of our questions here from the audience. What are your specific views on how Congress needs to act both on renewable fuel energy, renewable fuels like ethanol, and wind generation here in Iowa?
Well, first of all, Mid-American Energy produced 83% of its power from wind last year. So if we can do it here, and their goal is 2020, 100%. If we can do it here in Iowa, we can do it anywhere. But I tell you what, I want to get rid of these. I don't believe in subsidies. And I don't want to give any more subsidies to the gas and oil industry. I don't believe that fracking is a bridge technology. I mean, how on earth can you expect to drill millions of holes miles deep into the Earth's crust, fracture the bedrock beneath our feet, pump all that nasty chemicals down into the earth, and not expect any reprisals in the end? So there are things that we need to do energy-wise. You know what? I'm glad that the president is taking it on all hands on deck approach when it comes to the economy, but unfortunately the way he's doing it with energy is going to come back to bite us. All of this fracking is not a good thing going on. It's not a bridge technology.
All right, thank you. A question from the audience, and this does deal with drugs and healthcare, but maybe not the topic that Dr. Peters was raising earlier. How do you propose we combat the opioid crisis across the country and here in Iowa? Let's start with Congressman Loebsack.
Yeah, actually, this is an area where Congress came together recently. We passed a package of about 60 or so bills on a bipartisan basis. First, to recognize the extent of the opioid crisis, and then to try to do something about it. A lot of this is going to happen at the state level. I've actually got legislation that would provide $4.5 billion a year. That wasn't passed along with this big package, but would allow us in Iowa and other places to make sure that we actually know what the problem is. When I drive around, when I ride along with law enforcement folks on a pretty regular basis, they tell me, don't forget about meth and some of these other things, but opioids are a growing problem here in Iowa. I don't think we even have a good handle on the extent of the crisis here, quite honestly. So we've got to do more research on it. We've got to listen to the law enforcement folks. We've got to listen to the MDs. We've got to listen to the people who are dealing with this on the local level. But we're making progress, but we've got a long ways to go, no question.
Okay, and Mr. Strauss, you're next.
Well, you know what? I've gotten 2 robocalls in the past month from pain clinics pushing opioids. Man, did I give them a piece of my mind. I'm going to tell you something. What we need to do is manufacturers, distributors, and doctors are drug dealers. They need to go to jail. Period. This is a scourge upon our society, without a doubt. Absolutely, yes. And so that's how I would address the opioid crisis. You know what? When you're handing out thousands and thousands of pills to people, knowing that nobody can really take that much, you're just fueling the flames. So yeah, it's a problem. The problem is that too many congressmen are taking money from big pharma, whether it's distribution or whether it's manufacturing. And by the way, when you go to StraussForHouse.com, I have not taken a dime for anybody. I've spent over $20,000 of my own money on this, and it says, I don't want your money, all I want's your vote, right there on my website. I can assure you, no lobbyist from any big pharma is ever going to step into my office in Washington. I'm telling you that right now.
Thank you. Dr. Peters, why don't you address the opioid crisis, but then if you want to segue into the cost of prescription drugs, we'll give you a little extra time and then we'll let the others respond.
Sure. Wow, I don't think a lot of people should go to jail, like you said, but
Lock him up.
for the record, I'm a surgeon, so
just
I'm
let
not
him
a
die.
drug pusher. I'm a knife doctor. But yeah, I think that we know what the problem is to a large degree. I mean, it's great to do some more study, but we see it all the time in our counties, in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our homes, opioid and other drug addictions. So a few things. Number one, and I agree that it needs to be done more at the state and local level. I'm glad there's federal dollars to help fund that, but it needs to be looked after and be accountable at the local and state level. But we need to stop incarcerating people with drug addictions and mental illness and start treating them. A jail is a horrible location to go if you've got a problem, whether it's mental illness or a drug addiction. So that's one important part of it. I'm excited to see as we start getting medical cannabis going forward in Iowa, whether that will help curb the opioid and other drug addiction problems we're seeing in the state. I'm optimistic that it will. To my knowledge, I'm the only federal or statewide employee so far to visit the new Med Pharma place where they're growing cannabis in Des Moines. You've been?
No, I've been invited. I'll get there at some point. But it's a good place.
The kids really enjoyed seeing the pictures of the marijuana plants. But anyway, but I think there's a lot of things we can do. It needs to be done at the state and local level. On pharmaceutical companies, just real briefly, pharmaceutical prices more broadly, there are several issues here. One that I've really been investigating a lot, and I've been advancing this to Governor Reynolds and Jeff Foxworthy and Mary Mosman at the state level, is looking into the role of what are called pharmaceutical benefit managers. These are middlemen that help Wellmark and CMS for Medicare Part D negotiate drug prices, and basically they're paying a pharmacy one price but charging the healthcare insurer a much larger price. That difference is called a spread, and it's oftentimes huge. And if they get rebates from a pharmaceutical company, they oftentimes pocket that and don't pass that back to the people who are ultimately paying the bills. So that's just one example. Also, we need to look at intellectual property rights, the patent laws that govern our pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical companies are taking advantage of our patent laws in a process known as evergreening, which means keeping their patent always green, making money, getting around the laws that are in place. So I think we need to take a much tougher look at our patent laws as regards to pharmaceuticals, and each state, county, employer, federal government needs to look at these pharmacy benefit managers.
All right, thank you. And Congressman Loebsack, on the same topic of pharmaceutical costs.
Yeah, I do want to address the PBM issue, and I'm glad that you're finding out about that, because
I've known about it
that's something that I've been dealing with for quite a few years here, and partnering with Doug Collins and some other folks, mainly from Georgia, Republicans on the other side of the aisle. One who's a pharmacist, Buddy Carter. We often go on the floor together, and I'm the only Democrat, but I go with a number of Georgia Republicans to talk about this issue. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because PBMs are a real problem in terms of drug pricing, and they're taking advantage of folks. They're ripping off the small pharmacies here, and that's going to be a real problem for them when they're just trying to make their margins. But beyond that, look, I talk to seniors all the time, especially about the high cost of drugs, and they're living paycheck to paycheck and they've got Medicare and all the rest, and this is very, very difficult for them. I'm glad that we do have Medicare Part D at least. That is important, but we've got to do more than that. We've got to, I think, allow Medicare to negotiate with drug companies the way the VA does. I think we've also got to allow importation of drugs from at least some countries, Canada, for example, where it's safe, the drug business there, in terms of making sure that we can consume those drugs without any problems. So those are a couple things that I think we can do, but it is a real problem, especially among our seniors, and they tell me that every time I visit one of the senior centers around my district.
And Mr. Strauss, same follow-up to you about prescription drug prices.
Yes, and well, what gets me is I don't understand how all of these drug companies get research grants to go and develop drugs for diseases, and then they get to make all the profit off it too after those grants came from the public. And so I really don't understand the why Medicare's not able to negotiate. And the fact is that a lot of he talks about bringing in drugs from other countries. A lot of times those are U.S. drugs that are then sold through other countries. So they can sell them into other countries for a heck of a lot less money than we get them here. You know why? That's because congressmen are taking money from drug companies and they don't put the bills out. Okay, so that's a problem. Stop taking money from the drug companies and start voting for America instead of voting for your next election.
All right, James.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss, I guess we start with you this round. If you are elected and Democrats control the House, would you support the impeachment of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the president, or both?
Well, first of all, I did not support Brett Kavanaugh, but it didn't have anything to do with those women coming up and making claims. And those were wild, terrible things that people were doing to somebody just because they didn't like him. I didn't support Kavanaugh because he shred the Fourth Amendment. He was in the Bush White House, working on ways to surveil Americans and doing torture and everything else and advising the president on things like that. So I would not have supported him for that reason. But it had nothing to do with that. But when it comes to impeachment, no, I'm not going to impeach somebody for, he's been appointed, he's taken his oath, he's in place. Elections have consequences, period.
Dr. Peters, make the case for not impeaching, I guess. I'm assuming that you're not going to support impeachment at this point.
Well, I got to see. I would impeach anyone if there's enough evidence, but you need to see evidence. This country's a rule of law. We're supposed to be, and unless we have evidence of wrongdoing that reaches the level that impeachment's indicated, I'm not going to blanket say I would impeach anyone. I haven't seen that evidence. We're speaking regarding Kavanaugh again. I largely agree with Mark on this one issue. I really am bothered by Kavanaugh's previous writings on privacy, for example, and deferring, I think, too much to the executive branch, regardless of whoever's in the White House. But like was said, he has been nominated, he's been confirmed, and he's seated on the bench. So unless there's clear evidence of wrongdoing, I'm going to see what kind of job he can do.
Congressman Loebsack, if you're reelected and Democrats control the House, are you willing to spend time and resources on impeachment proceedings?
Well, I think it was a mistake for my colleague Jerry Nadler to talk about that at this point. Certainly, first of all, he's not the chair of the committee, but to talk about impeachment of Brett Kavanaugh at this point doesn't make any sense at all. I didn't want him to be on the Supreme Court, but that is not reason enough for me to think that he should be impeached. If I see evidence, then that's something I'll take into account. And when it comes to the president, we've got to let the Mueller investigation play itself out. We've got to make sure that people quit putting pressure on him to get this thing done, because he's doing a good job by all accounts. Give him time, let him see the evidence, let him do what he has to do his job, and then we'll see what comes of that. But right now, obviously, that's not something I would be in favor of, because I haven't seen any evidence for that at this point.
Excuse me, the Chinese, Japanese, and Europeans, all advanced countries, have advanced rail systems to help implement their highways or replace their highways and air transit. Why can't America move forward on this? Dr. Peters, we'll start with you.
Well, it simply has to do with population density, really. We do have some pretty robust rail areas in the Northeast corridor and to some degree on the West Coast, but spanning this huge country with such large areas of rural really just doesn't make economic sense at all. I've traveled high-speed rail in Europe and Japan, et cetera. I think it's wonderful, but we just don't have that kind of density to make that economically feasible, period. I'd love it if we could. If it was magical thinking, I'd love to see it happen, but it's just not economically possible here, except for in certain areas.
Congressman?
Yeah, we're not all like California, love our cars as much as Californians do, but I think we do love our cars, and I think that's part of what's going on there. But beyond that, we can have some more limited increases, I think, in passenger rail. A number of years ago, the Obama administration did allocate money to extend passenger rail from Chicago to Iowa City. I was all for that. I jumped on the Iowa Interstate Railroad with then Governor Chet Culver promoting that. all the cities along the way, all the chambers of commerce in these small towns, including Iowa City, wanted to extend passenger rail all the way to Iowa City. Unfortunately, the Branstad administration let the funding lapse. I knew that the federal government would take it away if we didn't do something about it, and it didn't happen here in Iowa. I think it would have been great for the 5,000 to 6,000 students that we have here at the University of Iowa from Illinois and from the Chicago area. I have no doubt that we would have filled the trains, and it would have been good for those communities along the way too, between here and Chicago, but especially between here and the Quad Cities. But it didn't happen, but I think it's still a good idea, and I hope we can do it in the future.
And Mr. Strauss, do you think that there's a market for that here in Iowa?
Yeah, and I've been on the trains myself over in Europe as well, and it's an experience. It's actually very pleasant. But yes, you know what we're starting to see. We're seeing light rail in major cities and such. But we've got such a airport infrastructure already here in the United States that I'm not sure that it really makes sense. That'd be a huge investment. And I don't think the payback could be there in a quick enough time. And besides what you do to the airline industry in the meantime, you'd have a tough time with that.
Okay, Mr. Strauss, we'll start with you. A couple questions from the audience dealing with balancing the federal budget. One question pointing out that the House of Representatives and Congress has a constitutional obligation to budget. And to provide oversight through the budgeting process. Another question, I have to live with a balanced budget and must make difficult budgeting decisions. Shouldn't the U.S. government have to do the same? Question to you is, what's your procedure for balancing the budget? Do you raise taxes? Do you cut spending? If so, how? What?
We cut spending.
What are you going to cut?
We cut spending. We stop these subsidies for corporations. We stop the subsidies and the donations. Basically aid to all of these countries around the world that most of them aren't even our friend anyway. And our military. You know what? I know that it's a dangerous time right now, but we can have the most powerful and technologically advanced military in the world at about 30% of what we're spending now. We've got 800 bases around the world. I think we could cover it with a couple of hundred, take care of that, make sure we honor our treaties and the people that we need to work with. So I would definitely, we can get hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars out of the military every year, probably get hundreds of millions of dollars more out of corporate subsidies and federal aid to the people, our enemies that we appease, I guess is what you'd call them. But I don't want to take it from people that are hurting. I don't want to take it from Medicare. I don't want to, and Social Security, leave Social Security the hell alone.
Thank you. Thanks. Dr. Peters, you're next. How do you go about balancing the budget? Raise taxes, cut spending? If so, whose taxes do you raise? Whose spending do you cut?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Number one, procedurally, like we've already talked about, restoring normal order to the House. We continue to fund programs that are no longer authorized. So the authorization process, I can bring you a whole list, but I don't have them memorized right now. And we don't go through the normal appropriations process of budgeting for the things we're spending on. So taking actually a look at what we're spending on would be a really good first start. The easiest lift, in my opinion, the easiest thing to reduce spending is healthcare reform. If we can reduce healthcare costs, that's the one that will have the greatest benefit both for Medicare spending, Medicaid spending, and just what we're seeing, what everyday Americans are feeling in their pocketbooks and employers are as well.
Okay, and Congressman Loebsack, same question.
As a start, we could save $2 billion that the oil and gas industry gets now for exploration in terms of tax benefits. I don't think they need that. And then I'm sure that we could come up with a longer list that we might actually agree on if the two of us sat down and tried to figure this out. But I actually supported a balanced budget amendment a number of years back, because it didn't actually threaten Social Security and Medicare. And I'm glad Mark mentioned Social Security. Keep your hands off Social Security and Medicare. And I haven't seen a balanced budget amendment since then that does that, so I haven't signed on to one. But clearly, Chris is right about the regular order. This is the only way that we're actually going to be able to do this, because so long as Congress passes these continuing resolutions, or the big omnibuses or the smaller ones, whatever the case may be, these big catch-all budget bills, although this year there were 7 or 8 real bills that were adopted all at once, first time since, I believe, 1996 that any of that happened to any degree at all. But regular order is the way to do it, so we can actually sit down, talk to one another, go through the
Thank
budget
you.
process, have an appropriations process, and get it done and make those hard decisions.
Thank you.
Dr. Peters, coming to you with this, I've heard a couple people talk about regular order. So the next Congress is going to elect a new Speaker of the House. Who do you have in mind for Speaker of the House? Jim Jordan has put his name out there. Is there somebody else that you would vote for to lead the Congress?
Yeah, I've met several of them, and I know Jim Jordan probably the best of the ones that are there. I'm going to be looking for someone who really makes a credible argument that they are going to restore regular order in the House, and also because we need rank and file members. If you're not part of leadership, even if you're in the majority, you have very little voice, very little control over what bills come or what amendments get added. It's of course even worse for people in the minority party. But even as if a freshman Republican next cycle, even if Republicans maintain control, unless I have somebody that's looking out to restore order, is going to be, I'm going to have very little voice until I get a little more seniority. So I'm going to be looking for somebody who makes a credible argument, makes those promises, and I think that I can believe they're going to deliver.
Representative Loebsack, Nancy Pelosi, or somebody else?
Well, I know Jim Jordan really well, too. He came into Congress and I did, and I've already told him I'm not going to vote for him for Speaker. But I think there are a lot of people on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, for that matter. Should the Republicans maintain their majority, who would be good speakers. But on the Democratic side, there's a whole crop of younger folks I've gotten to know over the years, and I'm completely open-minded about this. I'm not wedded to one individual or another on the Democratic side. I never have been. But clearly right now, I think you're seeing within the Democratic Party a lot of folks who'd like to see some change. It might be generational, would be generational for sure. But there are a lot of folks that I'm open-minded about. I'm not going to say at this point that there's one person that I'm for or against or whatever the case may be, but I want to hear them out, and we'll see how this turns out November 6th.
Mr. Strauss, in that 217 to 217 scenario, and you have the cast, you're going to cast the deciding vote. Who's your choice for Speaker of the House?
Actually, I would not. As long as you've got a duopoly in the Congress, you've got the same problem that we've been going through. It doesn't matter who the Speaker of the House is. If he's a Democrat or a Republican, you've got the same problem, because a Democrat's not going to let Republican bills come to the floor and vice versa. 217, and me, I'm going to run for Speaker, and I'm going to talk to everybody, and I'll tell everybody every viable bill gets a vote. And that's the only way we're going to get things going. But it doesn't matter who you elect as Speaker of the House. The party in charge is going to make the rules, and you're going to have gridlock. You're going to have the same thing that you've had for the last 20 years. No, they haven't worked together since the 90s, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Get ready for more polarization and more fighting amongst themselves.
I'm going to start with Congressman Loebsack because this obviously is going to hit you the closest. We do have a number of questions from the audience here about term limits. Do you support term limits? And if not, what other measures can be taken to prevent corruption in the halls of Congress?
Yeah, I wouldn't be running again if I supported term limits, obviously. But I think we have to think about this from the standpoint of a small state like Iowa. We only have 6 members of the U.S. Congress from Iowa, 4 House members and 2 senators. And, when we had Tom Harkin and Chuck Grassley, we got a lot of good things done for Iowa. We wouldn't have the Americans with Disability Act if we had had term limits for Tom Harkin, because he was first elected in 1974. He did not get that bill passed until the 1990s, and we wouldn't have the ADA. And I think that most of us can agree that that's a pretty good thing. So I'm concerned about sort of the clout issue, what that means if we limit folks here in Iowa, because in California, they've got over 50 House members. New York has a ton. Florida's got a ton. We need all the help we can get here in Iowa. And having folks around for a while, whether it's Chuck Grassley or Tom Harkin, actually, whatever you think about those 2 individuals, it often works for the state of Iowa.
Mr. Strauss, are you willing to put a number of terms that you're willing to serve?
Yeah, actually, it's on my website. And I say, what looks so horrible on anybody's resume, a U.S. congressman, that they got to go spend the rest of their life there? Come on. 2 terms. What it should be is 2 4-year terms. not 2 2-year terms, because you also don't want them starting to run for the next election the minute they get elected. So 2 4-year terms. Same thing with the Senate, 2 4-year terms. It works for the president. It would be great. You know what? If somebody wants to go 2 4-year terms in the Congress and then 2 4-year terms in the Senate and then 2 4-year terms as president, I'm fine with that. That's good experience. But the problem with them with unlimited 2-year terms in the Congress or in the Senate is all they do is they go in, they get married up with these lobbyists, they got their campaign donations, and they're going to vote for the things of the people that pay them money. So don't give the time for those relationships to grow.
And Dr. Peters.
I actually did sign a term limits pledge. It limits my term to, of course, I'm not obligated by it, but I signed it, so I'm going to obey by it. It says 24 years, which I personally think is too long. I personally have said that I will serve no longer than 10 years. At that point, I'll be 68. I think it's time, if I can't get a substantial amount of things done by that time, surely your phone's going off. Then it's time for somebody else younger with new ideas to come in and do the job. But more broadly, I do agree. The problem really with Congress is its dysfunction. It's not so long how long people are there, but concentrated power corrupts, and concentrated money corrupts. And so fixing some of the corruption, the problems that lead Congress to be dysfunctional, leads us to call for artificial term limits are really critical. These can include banning congressmen, senators, and staff from becoming lobbyists for a period of time after they've served in Congress. I'd say a decade at least. Ending the revolving door was what that is. Sorry, my time's up. We can hopefully come back to that issue.
Thank you.
Okay. And let's start with you, Dr. Peters. Question from the audience about Medicare. The question is, do you support Medicare in its current form? And I would just add, if you would change it, how would you change it? If you do support it in the current form, how do you pay for it going forward?
So I do support it, but I wish there were more options. So it's important to realize that about 80% of Medicare funding comes from general revenue and payroll taxes. So it's not, even though somebody on Medicare is paying a premium for their Part B or through their Medicare Advantage or their Part D, most of the costs are actually coming from people who are still working. That's an unsustainable model going forward. The only part of Medicare that has a trust fund is Medicare Part A, and that's due to run out in 2030, so just around the corner. It's not very long. These are things we knew were coming all along. So more choices for seniors I'd like to see. They should have the same options that I'd like to see for other Americans, which is higher deductible, cheaper options, the ability to put their own money aside in health savings accounts like other Americans can. Somehow magically, once you're 65, you're no longer trusted to, I guess, save your own money according to the government. So I would like to see Medicare continue, but I think we need to see some reforms and greater choices for seniors.
Thank you. And Congressman Loebsack, same question.
Yeah, I think that we got to look at sort of how we bend the cost curve for Medicare in the longer term. And I think we got to really deal with the chronic care or the chronic disease issues that we have in the society. I'm 65 myself. I'm very fortunate that I don't have any kind of a chronic disease. A lot of folks do. You know, I might have developed diabetes, type 2 diabetes by now. But, you know, I think that a lot of this has to do with our lifestyle and has to do with personal choices. I'm one of the few Democrats, unfortunately, who talks about personal responsibility on a fairly regular basis. I think we should encourage people when it's really unfortunate. Democrats don't talk about that very much. But I think we should encourage people through their health care plans, through their employers, to have a healthy lifestyle, a healthy living style. That's good for the employers, obviously, but long term, that can reduce our incidence of chronic disease, and that can really reduce the amount of money that's going to go out from Medicare in the long term. And I think that's one way we're going to help solve this problem long term.
And thank you. Mr. Strauss, do you support Medicare in its current form?
Absolutely.
What would you do to keep it solvent or
Actually,
change it?
well, now, as far as keeping it solvent, I don't have the figures in front of me, so I can't say exactly what needs to be done. I can tell you my experience with Medicare is it seems to work pretty well. My mother came to live with me in 2004 and spent 4 years with me during her battle with Alzheimer's. We never had any problem with her Medicare and Medicare Part D. My older brother also came to live with me in 2003. He's physically and mentally challenged, and he's on Medicare. And you know what? Whether it's new prosthetics, whether it's his drugs, it seems to work pretty well. So now, as far as keeping it solvent, I really need to look at that's going to mean in cutting in other areas because Medicare can't go away. Medicare and Social Security is here for the people that really don't win in life. And when I say win, they didn't end up a millionaire and has more money than they know what to do with. So we've got to make sure that health care is there for them. And I don't want to see people going broke and deciding whether to take their medication or eat. And so, believe me, we need to make sure that it stays solvent. But it seems to be working.
well,
In my
thank you.
experience, it's working good in its current form.
That's time. Thank you, James.
Let's see, who do we start with this round?
Mr. Strauss.
Mr. Strauss. Okay, we'll come right back to you. Go from Medicare to Social Security. When Social Security was enacted, life expectancy was 66 years old. Now it's close to 80. Should the retirement age be increased to at least 75? And part two of this question is, with Social Security going bust, how could privatization be worse?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in privatizing Social Security. Social Security was put here, again, for those who don't win in life. I don't see going to age 75 for everybody. I could see maybe going to age 70. I'm 60. Believe me, I'll work to the day I die. That's just that's who I am and how I'll be. But I know not everybody falls into that category. Social Security was really put in place for those that are going to need it. So I think there's ways of making sure Social Security stays solvent, and that may mean means testing. I know nobody likes that. Oh my God, I paid in, so I should get it back. You know what? You pay into your car insurance every month, but if you're a millionaire, do you really need that extra couple of grand a month coming in? So let's have some good common sense approaches to this and make sure that it's there for the people that need it. And you know what? If that rich guy all of a sudden loses money and he needs it then, he'll get it then too. But there's different ways of making it and making sure that it stays solvent. But taking it away from people is not the way to do it.
Dr. Peters, will raising the retirement age help keep Social Security solvent? And should it be privatized to better serve people?
Raising the retirement age alone won't make it solvent. 16 years is when it's due to become insolvent, and this is a problem with both Medicare and Social Security, right, is our aging population. I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers. On average, 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. So that's an enormous influx of new people on the rolls for Medicare and Social Security. By the time Social Security is due to run out of funds, we will have increased our population of people 65 and over by over 2/3. So it's a huge burden. We've got to do something if we want to keep these programs and make them solvent. For Social Security specifically, I think the thing that makes the most sense is eliminating the wage cap. So a certain point, 128,400, I think, is where it is, where if you make more than that, you don't get taxed any additional for Social Security taxes. Let's eliminate that and let's lower the rate overall. That would make it fair, a flat tax across the board for everyone. It would actually benefit lower income and middle income workers who would see lower income taxes, and we would make the program solvent.
Congressman, your solution for Social Security?
Yeah, I think we need to consider lifting the cap. There's no question about that. But I think the best way to really deal with this in the short term is to have good economic growth, have folks working, have them contributing to the trust fund. I think that's the best way to do this. Now, the trust funds, let's get something clear here. The trust fund itself will go bankrupt by 2034. What that means then is on average, the average Social Security recipient will get about 75% of his or her benefits because they're going to be getting the money that workers at that time are putting in. So the whole thing doesn't go bankrupt. It's not as though if you're living at that time and you're retired, you're not going to get any money from Social Security. You'll get less. And that's why we got to shore up the trust fund. Raising retirement age makes no sense to me at all. We've got a lot of people in this society who work really hard. You know, I'm a congressman. I was a college teacher. I didn't work with my hands. I'm not a bricklayer. I'm not somebody who goes out there and, has his body beaten up every single day or her body beaten up every single day. It'd be immoral to raise the retirement age for those folks.
I do have another question here from the audience, and I'm just going to read a portion of this because it's rather long, but I think you'll get the gist from the personal aspect of this. I want my vote to count for a more civil atmosphere in the legislative body in Washington. Now, I've asked some of you about this in the past in our one-on-one conversations. Dr. Peters, if elected, you're one out of 435 members. How do you essentially infect this body with bipartisanship in an era of all of this punditry and power?
Charm and good looks. You lead by example. I think it's exactly what I told you before when we talked. You got to be the example you want to see in others. One of the first things I want to do in the first few weeks that I'm in the House is meet with every other freshman representative, Democrat or Republican, sit down with them and say, what do you want to accomplish while you're here? If I can find some areas of agreement, I'm going to say, I'm with you, let's work on that. I think we need that bottom-up change in dynamic, and starting with the freshmen and representatives, again, Republican and Democrat, let's come together and find an issue. Let's find, I don't care what it is, if it's criminal justice reform with one person, if it's healthcare reform with another, if it's any other topic, let's find those people to come together and start working and solving them. People, when they work together towards a common goal, tend to find ways to get along.
Congressman, you've told me when we've spoken that you've intentionally avoided leadership roles within the party, but doesn't that kind of limit the influence that somebody who I believe Dr. Peters called you a nice guy has on Capitol Hill? I mean, shouldn't people who are looking to work in a bipartisanship way seek more leadership roles?
Right. No, I don't think I need to do that at all, because working across the aisle on a regular basis, that's how I've been getting things done, whether it's on rural broadband or rural education issues, any number of issues like that, because I work with folks who are from Republican districts who are in rural districts as well. I mentioned the precision agriculture bill that I've been working on with a guy from Ohio. This is something that I do. I seek these people out every single day. It's gotten to the point, in fact, that they come to me now and they ask me to be on their bills, and sometimes I have to tell them I can't quite go that far. I will do what I can to work with you on this issue. But that's my reputation there. People know me. That's why, as I said, 46% of the bills I put my name on and co-sponsor are initiated by Republicans. They work for my district, they work for Iowa, they work for America, and that's my record, and that's what I'm going to continue to do if I get reelected.
Mr. Strauss, if you're elected, I imagine you may be the only libertarian on Capitol Hill, and that would probably make you attractive to the Fox Newses and the MSNBCs of the world for a little camera time. How do you avoid that and focus on the job rather than the exposure that comes with such a role like that?
Well, I'll be going, believe me, both parties of Congress are going to want to work with me. But that's the problem. There's only two. It's the whole duopoly is the problem. We're so closely divided when it's 50-49, 51-49, whatever it is. In the Senate and then the Congress, when it's that close, you're going to have terrible issues trying to get people to work together. And then when you've got a speaker, when one party manages it, they've got a Speaker of the House bringing bills to the floor. That's the problem with the bipartisan. Now, I'll work with anybody that has a viable bill that's good for America, but nobody's going to be able to depend on me for the Democrats won't be able to depend on me for their vote, and neither will the Republicans. It's going to have to be something that's truly good for my people back home. Before I'll even give it any consideration.
Dr. Peters, the Congress last year approved tax cuts that by the CBO estimate would add over $1 trillion, like $1.7 trillion to the deficit. But the economy is also picking up. So would you be in favor of additional tax cuts? Would you want to go back and pay for the tax cuts that are already on the books? Are there some that you would roll back?
So one thing I would like to see is making the individual income taxes cuts permanent. That was something that was due to expire, I believe, I'll give Mr. Lobsack a chance to respond. He voted against making that permanent. So that'd be one thing I would definitely like to see. There are some things that happened in the tax bill that I would have liked to have seen that were not there. I would have liked to have seen closing more corporate loopholes, for example. But overall, I would have supported the bill. My main goal going forward is I would like to see those individual income tax cuts made permanent, because I think people like having a little extra, a little fatter wallet, a little bigger paycheck going home, and it's making a difference for people. It's making a difference for the economy as well. So, but we do need to return, and we talked about it already, is looking at spending reform even more so.
So just to be clear, spending reform, do you feel like these tax cuts need to be paid for? Or is the economic growth taking care of it? And if so, if you're going to pay for it, how do you do that?
Yeah, there was, I don't know if it was by the CBO, but there was a revised report showing that it looks like they're going to be paying for more themselves than they was originally projected. I think that just came out in the last couple days ago. A couple days, I'll have to double check that resource. But that was one of my concerns about it, of course, was we had this big tax cut, and then we had a big spending bill that followed it. And I was very concerned about that impact on the debt. So yes, I think I am concerned that we need to find a way to pay for it. It looks like things are not going to be as dire as the original CBO forecast came out as, but I think it is something we do need to look at. How are we going to afford this long term? One of the reasons I'm running is I want to make sure we leave behind a world worth inheriting for my kids and grandson, and $21 trillion in debt is an awful, horrible inheritance to pass on.
And Congressman Lobsack, of the available choices, you can either raise taxes again or roll back some of those tax cuts. You can choose to pay for them by cutting spending, or you can rely on the economic growth to take care of it. If there's another option that I don't know about, go ahead. But
Well, I voted in both instances for these tax cuts, as Dr. Peters pointed out. The first time, obviously, there wasn't enough going to the low and middle wage income earners. 83% of this money goes to the very top and the corporations. And I could not in good conscience vote for that, especially given that it was going to add, as you said, over $1.5 trillion to our national debt. I have 3 grandchildren. I don't want them to be paying that national debt off either. And not only that, what we know is that the Republican Party, and I hate to be this way, blame it on just one party, but it is the case that just like here in Iowa, they want to cut taxes because they know if there's fewer dollars available out there than for various programs, they're going to cut Social Security and Medicare. Paul Ryan has said that's what he wants to do. So there was no way I was going to vote for this tax bill in the first place. And then the second bill, again, we're talking about unpaid for. I'd like to see much more going to those folks in the low and middle income brackets. And look, I'm more than happy to roll back the tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, at least to cut those tax cuts so that we can pay for those low and middle income earners. But that was not the option before me.
and same question to you, Mr. Strauss.
Well, I tell you what, honestly, we should be absolutely ashamed of the fact that one of the largest industries in our country does nothing more than help us figure our taxes. That's absolutely ridiculous. The IRS monitors hundreds of millions of Americans on every dime they make, and all the money it costs to do that. Not only that, take 40% of the people that itemize. Now you're looking at every dime they spend. And I just sold my company, and it was no fun being a business owner. The IRS is in your bank accounts and looking at everything you do. It's absolutely horrific. I propose one simple form of taxation. You buy something, you pay a tax. Government no longer cares how much you make. Nobody cares about how much you make. Same thing with corporations. Corporations don't make money, people make money. If we went to a straight consumption tax, you buy something, you pay a tax. And believe it or not, the cost of goods would go down. Do you know how much money is spent nationwide on accountants and lawyers to figure these taxes for everybody? You know what? And those people would get snapped up, because if you could imagine if companies from all over the world could come to the United States, build brick and mortar factories to ship things around the world, knowing they're not paying income taxes. Yeah, when they take that money out of America, as profits, they're going to pay some tax there. But this would cause an economic boom in America like never seen before. We need to simplify it. 75,000 pages of taxes. Those are written by lobbyists for lawyers and accountants to keep them busy. The more difficult they can make our tax code, the more money they make. So let's change the code.
Thank you.
question comes from the audience. Questions. A number of states are seeking to challenge and overturn Roe v. Wade, and many people see the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh as leading to it being overturned after 45 years. If that happens and Congress legislates abortion, what sort of legislation would you support? Restrictions after some point of a pregnancy banning abortions and late-term abortions? Would you allow abortion in the cases of rape, incest, fetal anomalies? And I believe we start with you, Mr. Strauss.
Well, yeah, I definitely, and that's the thing about it is with the Supreme Court, if Congress would write clear and precise laws, not open to interpretation, we wouldn't be going through this. So if Congress would write laws on, for example, on abortion, yes, I think that, certainly there has to be a late term, a certain cutoff time of when you can do it. But I'd hate to tell any family that, maybe their daughter comes home, she made a mistake, and Dad, I'm pregnant and I'm going to miss college. You know what? I don't want to tell that person, you have to have that child. If Roe v. Wade is turned over, the states are going to address it right away. So I would rather see it addressed in the Congress. And you know what? The Congress, if they would, again, write clear and precise laws, not open to interpretation by activist justices, then we'd be a lot better off.
Dr. Peters, same question.
So I'm not this kind of doctor, but I am a physician, so I do know that there are medical indications for abortion. So an outright ban I have never supported. I do not think, however, that anybody has a right to an abortion that's paid for by someone else. So I'd absolutely like to remove taxpayer public funding for abortions. Beyond that, I'm happy to see states kind of go after this and set their limits in accordance with what their population feels like. It would maybe end up we have a patchwork, different definitions when abortion is legal in one state compared to another, but that's how things were prior to Roe v. Wade. I don't personally have a problem with that. I do agree, though, that this is something an issue that Congress can decide a little more clearly, but for right now, the ball's in the court's hands, so we'll see what they're going to do.
And Representative Loebsack.
I'm a supporter of Roe versus Wade. I don't want anyone to tell my wife, my daughters, women in this audience, women of America, what they ought to do as far as their own health care decisions are made. So whatever the Congress does, I want to protect that right. I hope that Roe versus Wade is not overturned with Brett Kavanaugh now added to it. But if it is, I will never vote for anything that will restrict those women's rights to their own health care choices.
All right.
I want to another question here from the audience, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this because we have time constraints here. Dr. Peters, I'm going to start with you. Can you name or list 5 actions of the current House Republican majority which you oppose? Now, if you can't get through 5 in a minute, that's okay, but at least start with your biggest disagreement.
Wow. I haven't ever been asked that, so I haven't really thought about it. We've already kind of talked about something. I opposed the omnibus bill, the big spending bill, which increased our debt even further. Again, I oppose the fact that we don't have normal order in the House, and that's kind of that's obviously a leadership problem. The fact that we aren't going through the normal appropriations and budgeting process. Okay, that's 3. I'm worn out. If I come more, I'll interject, but that's 3 I can think of offhand.
Congressman, I'm sure you have plenty, so I kind of want to spin this around a little bit. Can you name any?
I'm going to name 12.
Can you name any actions of the current House Republican majority which you supported?
The current House majority, the Republicans? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they and actually the Democrats got together with this appropriations bill that Dr. Peters was talking about. And I think overall it was a pretty good appropriations bill, and I'm glad that the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership came together on that. I think it makes a lot of sense. But as I said, there are all those bills that I put my name on that are originated by a Republican. I'd like to see a lot more of those come to the floor. And being in the minority, I often have to work with the other side, being the Democratic lead on bills, and I've done that with leaders of the Energy and Commerce Committee to reduce regulations on small internet service providers. I worked with a guy named Greg Walden from Oregon, whose job at the time was to defeat everybody like me. He was head of the committee, the Republican committee. But I worked with him together so we could help those small internet service providers here in Iowa. I've done on any number of other issues. I'm more than happy to work with the other side of the aisle, as I said, going forward. But I have opposed my party on occasion as well, as you might imagine.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss, what are your biggest disagreements with the current majority in the House?
Well, I guess it'd be with, number one, their spending. And with the omnibus bill, they couldn't even read the bill. They didn't even read it. Everybody admitted they didn't even read the bill. What was it, $1.4 trillion, something crazy like that? So that, and then of course what they're doing right now with, opening up land to fracking all across the country and offshore as well. So it's, there's a lot of things that they're doing that I don't agree with, but there's so many things that they're not doing that needs to be done, that really needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. We've talked a lot about healthcare. I want to do a round on mental health and generally speaking, what should the federal government do? What would you support? And please also address the over 64,000 Iowans who are living with Alzheimer's, and what can be done about that as a public health issue. And starting with Congressman Loebsack.
Yeah, Alzheimer's is a difficult issue. More and more folks are dealing with that, and it's costing our society billions of dollars a year if we're not going to be dealing with this issue. I voted consistently and supported stronger funding for the NIH, National Institutes of Health, for example, so we could do more research on Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Again, the cost of this is just prohibitive for our society, not to mention the cost for the individuals and the families themselves. Mental health is a big issue for me. My mom struggled with mental illness issues her whole adult life. She was a single parent. When the governor here, Governor Branstad, closed down the two mental health institutes at Clarinda and Mount Pleasant, I normally don't weigh in on those issues, but I spoke out publicly against that. I think Medicaid, as it's being administered here in Iowa, is a real tragedy because we have a lot of folks who are struggling with mental health issues, who are struggling to get the kinds of help that they need because of the privatization of Medicaid. So as a congressman, I can deal with a lot of these issues, speak out, do what I can to pass legislation to try to make it better for folks and have more accessibility.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss, mental health in general and Alzheimer's in particular, what can the federal government do and what would you support?
Well, the Alzheimer's, of course, now, as I stated earlier, I cared for my mother during hers. As a matter of fact, my mother, my brother, and I were featured on the 2007 Democratic presidential debates where we helped usher in stem cell research. So we brought the Alzheimer's to the question on the floor, and then, of course, they all came out and said stem cell research, and I actually then, Obama signed it into law. You know what, I would like to actually, I got to tell you, those 4 years where I cared for my mother were the best 4 years of my life, and the most I'm proud of. And I'd like families out there to understand that they can do it, and you just have to remember, when it comes to Alzheimer's, they can never relearn. You have to learn. I'd see my mother looking at her plate. She didn't know how to use her utensils. I had to jump in. She went a couple of days without a bath. She didn't know how to turn the knobs. I had to jump in, and help her with these things. Families can take care of a loved one with Alzheimer's. It's just that they have to really be educated on how to do that and how to make it a good experience instead of a bad.
All right. Thank you. And Dr. Peters.
So I think just as quick background, federal government has punted on mental health care since the 1960s when during the Kennedy administration, they went through a big process of deinstitutionalization of people with mental illness. And that was a good thing, but it was supposed to be followed up with community, clinics and halfway homes, et cetera, and the funding never came through. And there was a renewed interest in it either during the Nixon or Reagan administrations, I can't remember, maybe both, but it's just never happened. So this is something that is going to have to be pursued at the state and county, local level. I think it's where it should be. I'd be happy to see some federal dollars kind of to stimulate that and make that happen. But again, the federal government has failed on this for decades. I don't see any sign that that's likely to change. I do want to see more funding for Alzheimer's research. I think that's a very good thing. There is some interesting research that's coming out. This is something I follow on a fairly regular basis, and there is some exciting new potential breakthroughs on the horizon.
All right, thank you.
One issue we haven't talked about yet is guns and gun control. I believe we start with Mr. Strauss. What sort of gun legislation would you support? More restrictions, fewer restrictions, or leave it to the states to decide on this issue?
Actually, well, states always have a say. Outside of what the federal government does, states have a say. I personally, I've never owned a gun, but I don't have any problem with people owning guns. But I feel that they should be responsible for those guns, and they should be registered. We need to know where they are and what's going on. But I mean, not in the intrusive part as like it might sound, but all I'm saying is that you need to be able to be safe in your home and in your person, but at the same time, you've got to be if you own guns, you need to be responsible for those. And so that's really, I'm not against the Second Amendment, but then again, I'm not for the old Wild West either. So,
Dr. Peters, should there be restrictions on magazines, on bump stocks, on all sorts of restrictions like that, or again, leave it up to the states to decide?
No, I don't think there should be, and I'll explain why. I'm an Army veteran. I'm a gun owner. Very responsible, taught all of our kids to shoot. They know gun safety is all the steps to make sure they don't point that gun in a bad direction. They know how to load it. They know how to clean it. And if they don't clean it, they get in trouble. But things like banning bump stocks or high-capacity magazines in this era of 3D printers, it's feel-good legislation that won't do anything at all to impact gun violence. I mentioned I'm a gun owner, but I'm also, again, a dad and a grandfather. I've still got one son who just left, I guess, was still here at West High, two that are in college. I worry about them. I worry about my wife when she's at home alone or at our clinic alone. So I think we all have a shared interest, and nobody wants to see more gun violence. A lot of this comes down to our societal disconnectedness. We don't know our neighbors. We spend far too much time looking at little flat screens that we carry around in our pockets. We need to heal our communities and deal with the mental illness we talked about earlier.
Representative Loebsack, more legislation or more neighborliness?
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Peters talked about Julie, his wife. I had a conversation with a farm wife not that long ago near Oakville, and she explained to me her concerns about being alone in that farmhouse. And if somebody were to intrude, she wanted to make sure that she had access to a weapon. And we should never take that weapon away from her. I think we have to respect the Second Amendment, first and foremost. Beyond that, we do have to think about common sense gun safety legislation. I do favor ban on bump stocks. I do favor truly universal background checks. I do favor laws that would not allow someone who's on a terrorist watch list to get a gun. I don't think that makes any sense. But again, we have to respect the Second Amendment. I think we can find a proper balance here. It's about finding what we can do in terms of common sense gun safety legislation. One last point. We need to listen to those kids who were at those high schools and at those schools where those mass shootings occurred. We have to listen to them and take into account what they have to say about this, because they're on the front lines, literally, and we can't let those things happen again.
And I believe I have the last question. Dr. Peters, I'm going to start with you, and I'm a little surprised this is the last question, but this is kind of where we've come now. There may be some people in this room who don't remember a time where the nation was at war. We've been in Afghanistan now for 17 years, and we don't really have a pathway out of this. So is it time for the House and the rest of the legislative branch to start flexing more of its muscle here as the controller of the purse strings to determine where we're going next in this war on terror?
Absolutely. This is not just this issue; it's any number of issues. Ben Sass, Senator from Nebraska, had a wonderful little comment during the Kavanaugh hearings that if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend you see it. And he talks about how the politicization of not only the Supreme Court but also the executive branch has largely been due to the failure of Congress to actually do its job. And it's leaving authority to the executive branch, to regulatory agencies, and the Supreme Court is picking up slack on their level where Congress is just failing to do its job. We want our elected representatives to be transparent and accountable directly to us, especially your House members. We are your most directly accessible link to the federal government. And if we don't have congressmen and women and senators doing their jobs, and then these are kind of the problems we see. Not only in ongoing warfare, which we definitely need a more focused foreign policy approach, but in any number of other areas as well.
Congressman, in Bob Woodward's recent book, it was noted that President Trump wanted out of this conflict and was reluctantly talked into the current strategy. Is it time for Congress to step in with the military and say we need a better way forward?
Yeah, it's been a lot of years. And Congress, we've been in Afghanistan since 2001. Congress has never stepped up to the plate and exercised its authority. First thing I think we have to keep in mind is the troops. Not only those who are there now, but those who've been there. Make sure that we take care of those folks when they come home. Terry's son, my stepson, and his wife both are active duty Marines. They are out at Camp Pendleton. They've been deployed numerous times. When I was on the Armed Services Committee, I traveled to Afghanistan and Iraq, I think about 11 times. We have to support those folks who are there. I think the best way we can support them is to call for a conversation about this nationally, but in particular in Congress, because we've got to do all we can to make sure that if we're going to have activities in Syria and other places that are not covered by the original authorization for the use of military force, and I'm not saying we should have those activities, but if they're going to be there, then Congress has to have a new authorization for the use of military force. We have to have that conversation. And thinking about future conflicts, too. Think about the potential costs of those conflicts, the long-term costs.
Thank you. And Mr. Strauss, what would your plan be in Congress?
Well, first of all, get the heck out of the Middle East. You know what? I'm going to tell you something. Saddam Hussein was a necessary evil in the region. The fact is, the Middle East would be a much nicer place today if he'd have stayed there. We had him completely contained. We totally screwed the pooch when we went into Iraq. We spent trillions of dollars, killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, and thousands of Americans died, and there was no reason to go in whatsoever. I am tired of these wars around the world. They're not even wars. Nobody's declared war. It's the president just seems to have the right to do it these days. After Bush went now Trump's, or then Obama kept doing it, and now Trump's doing it. Bring our people home, leave the Middle East to its own demise. It's not our problem.
All right, thank you. And we promised you all closing statements. We're very short on time, so keep them as concise as you can. Starting with Mr. Strauss, and we'll just go this way down the table.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all very much for allowing me to come here today. You know what, I'm 60 years old, and I'm sick and tired of what I'm seeing in Washington. I'm sick of the divide. There's only one way to get rid of that divide, and that's get more parties into the Senate and the Congress. If you can imagine multiple parties coming together to vote on things good for America, not based on what their party boss tells them to do. I mean, no offense to these guys here, but they've got somebody telling them how to vote. Believe me, you don't vote this way, we're going to primary you. Guess what? Nobody's going to do that to me. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make sure that we don't spend more than we're supposed to spend, that we don't attack countries we're not supposed to attack, and that we leave behind a world. Our oceans are absolutely destroyed. Do you realize that for the past century, every coastal city around the world has been sending garbage scows 30, 40 miles offshore and dumping their garbage? That's all coming home to roost now. Look at what just went on in North Carolina. Last year, I was a month ago this year, I was in Houston helping with the rescue effort for Harvey. I didn't go to North Carolina because, number one, citizen rescue should not be the way, and then you saw it again in North Carolina. But what you also see in North Carolina is the hundreds of sewage pits from hog confinements. That is going to be an ecological disaster, and we need to make sure we do something to make sure that doesn't happen in Iowa, which it won't, by the way. Triumph Foods is putting a big one up by Sioux City, and they have actually engineered in a wastewater treatment plant because these hog confinements are the size of small cities
Thank
when it
you.
comes to waste.
Thank you. Dr. Peters.
So yeah, again, thank you to League of Women Voters and Task Force on Aging for putting this together. Thank you to our moderators. Really appreciate it. Thank you to both Dave and Mark for being here, and for all of you to being here as well. Politics is a mess right now, and it has been. Everybody knows it, and it has been for quite some time. There are things we can do to fix it. Part of that is electing good candidates, good elected officials who will serve as good examples of a better path forward. A lot of it's what we need to do on our own as well as voters, and we're all of us up here voters as well. Become better informed. We need to have longer, more substantive discussion about issues. I appreciate this effort, but 1 minute to answer most of these questions is hardly adequate to begin to scratch the surface. We need to become less polarized in our society, whether that's in our classrooms, whether that's on social media. Probably get off social media would probably be one big, real good idea right now. But there's a lot we can do. We need this country to work, and we're in danger of not working. We need a new path forward. We need a new vision. We need better people. We need new ideas. I think I'm the one that would bring that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Congressman Loebsack.
All right. Thanks to the League and to the Task Force on Aging, and thanks to the folks who want to unseat me. Thank you for being here. I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome.
And thanks to the moderators. At this point in our history, I think it's important that we should appreciate the media, actually, and the free press. That's part of why our country is as great as it is. Look, I've been fighting for hardworking Iowans ever since I first got elected. Given my own background, how I grew up in Sioux City and grew up in poverty, and my mom, as I said, was a single parent, struggled with mental health issues. By all rights, it's pretty amazing that I'm here right now. But I wouldn't have gotten here if it had not been for a lot of help with a lot of people along the way, not just my family, but a lot of supports that I got. That first 40-hour-a-week job that I had when I was 16, it was a federally funded program for so-called disadvantaged kids. Those are the kinds of things that I want to fight for. That's why I'm hoping to get reelected so I can do it for at least another couple of years. Work on jobs in the economy. That's what I hear the most when I'm out every weekend, when I'm not in D.C. I'm back home and I'm getting around the 24 counties. I had over 650 meetings in my district the last 2 years. I had 55 coffees with your congressman the last 2 years. And folks are focusing on jobs in the economy. That's what I'm hearing more than anything. And then beyond that, making sure that we protect Social Security and Medicare. Don't privatize Social Security. Don't voucherize Medicare. And finally, I mentioned the veterans. We didn't have any questions per se on veterans, but I honor Chris's service. I never served in the military myself, but we have to make sure that we take care of those veterans, those folks who signed on the dotted line, who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. We have to treat them with the dignity and the respect they deserve. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And let's give all the candidates a big hand.